Hi, Canucks and friends, and welcome to the Chronicle of New Eden. I'm Dan Denal, the co-CEO of Story in Advance, an alliance and wormhole. I'm also the co-host of the Canuck Capsules Chronicles. It's a weekly show about Eve's news every Tuesday at 19:30 Eastern Time Zone. This week is going to be about the Jovian Empire and the faction and Enclaves. Since the first episode about the Jove, we heard about the modifiers and the statics. Today we're gonna really understand how they think, what they do, and what are their goals. We're also gonna talk about the Society of Conscious Thought, well known as the SOCP. At each event, we receive boosters from them. Am I the only one who found it weird that once again the Jovians still have an impact on the New Eden of today? I definitely think that's another proof that the Jovians still alive somewhere. So, are you ready to dive into this episode with me? Let's start it! Factions and Enclave. The Jove of the Third Empire may be a pale shadow of their glorious forebears from the First and Second Empires, but they do not fall short when it comes to factionalism and the tendency to splinter into isolated enclaves. If the Jovian Disease is a real menace that has only relatively recently become the doom of the race, then their almost pathological need to form factions is perhaps the original curse of the Jovian people. The two main philosophical groupings that have been in tension throughout the history of the Jove are the Modifiers and the Statics. They are very broad categories containing numerous factions and splinters, many of which are often found working against one another, as well as members of the opposing tendency. For most of Jovian history, these groups were organized into enclaves made up only of members of particular faction or subfaction. The Third Empire and the Jovian Directorate changed that somewhat, making possible unusual groups such as the Society of Conscious Thought. But Jovian enclaves usually lean at least a little more in one direction than another. The Modifiers. The modifier tendency has manifested itself in many strange forms over the shared history of the three Jove Empires. Its unifying principle is the notion that the existing state of the Jovian race must be altered using genetic manipulation. Two major philosophical factions have endured over these ages to the extent that they can be considered the primary groupings within the modifier tendency, the existentialists and the Puritans. The existentialists are almost the archetypal experimenters and scientific adventurers, constantly exploring new avenues of research and above all, tinkering within their own genetic code. The existentialists are the most energetic of all Jovian factions and the quickest to debate, appoint or advance their own agenda. Their energy is somewhat constrained by their own diversity, leading to vicious arguments within their own ranks and steady erosion as radicals splinter off to form their own philosophical sect. Even so, the existentialists are perhaps the most dangerous individuals in Jovian society, and their disdain for non-Jovian leads them to see other races as little more than resources or opportunities for ever more bizarre experiments. The Puritans constitute the other main faction within the modifier tendency and are a rather more coherent grouping, with a single philosophical principle guiding their conduct. Put simply, the Puritans wish to reverse the accumulated centuries of genetic manipulation that the Jove have subject themselves to. At this point in the history of the Jove, this can be considered an extraordinary and probably impossible goal. For the Puritans, however, it is the logical answer to the Jovian Disease. If the taint of genetic manipulation can be erased, and a pure form of the Jovian genetic code developed, then the race may be saved. If the concept seems sound, in practice it has led to manner of collective genetic engineering projects, some with rather spectacular and unexpected results. Regardless, the Puritans are capable of commanding the respect of even the statics. The activities of the various modifiers factions have resulted in another group usually considered part of their tendency, the so-called lab rats. In truth, the lab rats are not a coherent group, and the name, the closest approximation Concord translators could put on the usage of the Jovian term Pokemonoi, refers to the rather tragic origin of this class of Jove as individuals specifically created for the purpose of scientific research, rather than the social good of reproducing. Lab rats are in no way a slave class or possess unlimited rights. They are conceived and brought to term in the fetus tubes according to a particular set of experimental variables, and once born are treated as full Jove in the normal way. Lab rats are usually asked to voluntarily make themselves available for tests throughout the rest of their life. Such are the cultural pressures bound up with the search for a cure for the Jovian disease that almost all lab rats acquiesce in this melancholy duty. The statics. The statics tendency is marked by the unifying notion that there has been enough change wrought on the Jovian genetic code and even on the very fabric of Jove Empire society. As a result, the statics are very firmly opposed to large-scale genetic engineering, and many are fanatically opposed even to minor genetic alterations. The knowledge that the Third Empire is very far from the pinnacle of Jovian achievement has considerably blunted the philosophy of social stasis within the tendency. But the most dedicated still hold that attempts at direct change to society are misguided and should be resisted. There are three significant factions within the static tendency: the elders, the unsullied, and the stasis people. The elders, in something of an historical irony, are the descendants and beneficiaries of one of the very first Jovian factions to use genetic engineering to effect significant change in the race. Their first empire forerunners were masters in the arts of gerontological science, and manipulate their genetic code to considerably slow the aging process. Their success was significant. Pure strains elders can live for centuries in a natural lifespan, and even longer still with longevity and plants. It is quite possible that the oldest elders of them all have outlived more than one member of the Amarian royal houses. The elders achieved paramount authority over the First Empire, but they developed their static philosophies to an extreme that brought about the fall of the very empire they were trying to preserve. This failure weighs heavily on the elder faction's collective conscience, and while they do continue to argue their view, elders rarely take an active role in Jovian politics anymore. It should be noted that there is no relationship between this Jovian faction and the main matter of spiritual leaders known as elders. The Unsullied are the strongest advocates of an end to all genetic manipulation and experimentation. For the Unsullied, enough has been done, and the time has come to abandon genetic technology, except where absolutely necessary for the survival of the race. The Unsullied do not even use genetic therapies for medical purposes, opting instead for conventional medicine, nanotechnology, or cybernetic methods of dealing with sickness and the onset of old age. The Unsullied are rather active in the political life of the Jovian Directorate, and it is likely many of the Jove encountered by the other races were members of this faction. Like the elders, and for that matter all status, the Unsullied are deeply concerned with the accumulation and preservation of knowledge. Unlike the elders, however, the Unsullied are rather outward-looking. With the exception of genetic manipulation, they are willing to entertain the development and spread of many technologies, particularly cybernetics and nanotechnology. The Stasis people are a relatively small faction in numbers, but their importance is considerable. Their mastery of cryostasis technology and the use of virtual environments has led to their taking on a role as important keepers of much knowledge that would otherwise have been lost to the Third Empire. For some reason, the Stasis people insist that virtual environment technology has reached the optimal level and should not be developed any further. While those Jove from other factions, who have been granted access to their virtual environments, have been impressed with the fidelity of these simulations, they have often wondered why the Stasis people do not experiment with novel environments or alter parameters, such as the information density and temporal flow of the simulations. The Stasis people politely refuse to discuss such matters and concentrate on their role as the ultimate archivists of the Third Empire. In keeping with their special function, the Stasis people maintain cordial relations with all tendencies and factions of the Jove. They can be classed as statics more on the basis of their philosophical outlook than any political or ideological activist. The Society of Conscious Thought. In AD 23,044, roughly 2 centuries after the formation of the Third Empire, a man named Lord Labron founded a new kind of organization that he called the Society of Conscious Thought. While Lord Labron was a static healing from a particularly outward-looking unsullied enclave, he had been a keen student of a remarkable Jovian entrepreneur and intellectual named Gorda Hodge. A rather unique individual, Hodge derived from the Elver's genetic strain, but he had broken with the introspective and secluded way of their faction as a young man, wishing to help expand the Third Empire. It is thought that Jove may have been a crew member on the long flight of Jovian motherships from the Heaven constellation. Certainly as an elder, it is quite possible that he had lived through that time. He died a little under 2 centuries after the Jovian resettlement. Hodge's special talent in his later years lay in nurturing young minds, particularly those with a thirst for knowledge and a desire to understand the ultimate ends of sentient life. Wealthy, seemingly from his work as a leading corporatist in the early Third Empire, Hodge had much time to churn out cryptic philosophical texts and carefully construct scientific papers. Most view his philosophy as eccentric and his science as impractical. Hodge did not care. As he saw it, his real task was mentoring a generation of Jovian minds in preparation for the coming age. In Lord Labron, Gorda Hodge probably has his greatest success. When the Old Seven and philanthropists finally passed, Labron made a deep study of his mentor's work and found in them the outlines of a profound and rich philosophy. After many years of study and preparation, the energetic young intellectual gathered together like minds and found the Society of Conscious Thought, SOCT, as a vehicle for the exploration of Jovian spiritual potential. The great task of the society was to discover the meaning of life itself, a seemingly quite-toxic goal that somehow led to the cult-like organization into the politics of the Jovian Directorate. In truth, the Jovian need to find meaning in existence was only heightened by their lack of deep emotional life, and the society therefore readily attract many dynamic adherents, becoming very powerful in the process. For a period, the society was effectively the secret power behind the Jovian Directorate, operating as a sort of shadow government. But the distortion effect this had on the Third Empire was swiftly noticed by equally active factions. In particular, the various modifier groups band together to break the society's power, and even succeed in persuading the orthodox statics to agree to ban the society. In the widely distributed and diverse atmosphere of the Third Empire, however, such a ban could not hold forever. The SOCT slowly but surely emerged again, but this time as a new form of scientist and spiritual community. In order to avoid triggering the intervention of other factions, they established a far-flung network of self-contained enclaves that they call kitses. The kitses were built in remote places throughout the Jove Empire, with the resulting settlements resembling fortresses, monasteries, and house living quarters, food production, libraries, laboratories, and all the needs of a self-sustained commune of Jovian spiritual scientists. Each kit develop independently of the other, but communication between the kids of the SOCT network is frequent and considered vital to the mission of the society. Once the Jove established contact with the core empires, the society began setting up its own connections with the other nations of New Eden. Before long, the SOCT established new kidses in remote areas beyond the Jove Empire and closer to the core of New Eden. Ultimately, the society went so far as to openly establish control over an isolated constellation in the mostly uninhabited Geminate region. Nominally independent of the Jove Empire, the society was granted sovereignty over the N-TAC K4Q0 constellation by Concord without intervention by the Jovian Directorate. The SOCT has subsequently had a large impact on New Eden through its policy of admitting non-Jove to its scopes, arguably providing the best education available to non-Jove in New Eden. The SOCT schools have a remarkable track record when it comes to turning out world leaders in science, industry, and politics. So prestigious and effective is an SOCT education that even the elite of the Armor Empire will eagerly send their children, should they gain one of the coveted scholarship to a kid's school. That's the end of the episode. Be honest, guys, the status, do they look suspicious to you? When I'm reading their story, I wonder if they know something about the collapse of the Second Empire. Why the stasis people consider that the virtual environment should not be developed any further. No, we don't want to talk about it. Does that lure anyone? I'm sure somebody knows something. So next week's episode gonna be about the Jovian mothership. See you next week, Canucks and friends!